Okay, so now we need to write our conclusion. And I have my 4-square chart here already. This 4-square chart is definitely coming in clutch because now that I've brainstormed all these ideas, I can use them because they're my own ideas and put them right into my essay. So I'm writing my conclusion. And here I brainstormed, and I did this way at the beginning, but I used my 4-square chart and I brainstormed. So now I can actually take these ideas, these sentences that I brainstormed and put them into my conclusion. So the first thing that I was supposed to do was restate my claim or my thesis. And I wrote, dealing with problems right away is always the best way to solve them so they do not get too big to handle. So that's great. Why don't I start a new Google Doc so then I can put my conclusion on there, or up to you guys, just depends on how you want to do that. You can start a new doc, you can keep doing it on the same doc, up to you. But I'm just gonna start, I'm gonna put this as my topic sentence just for now and see how it goes. If I need to revise later, I can. All right, cool. Wanna make sure I put Command A so I can select all, that I have the right font, and that it's going to be double spaced. Cool. All right, so I got that. Next thing, let's see. So I also want to use the conclusion guide. And in the conclusion guide, it says the first thing I need to do is restate or reword or reinforce the claim, the thesis statement. And here's a sentence starter. In conclusion, the best way to deal with conflict is to. Cool. Then review or summarize the ideas or points that I've made in the body of the essay. So all of those points that I made in the first 2 body paragraphs and my counterpoint or my counterclaim body paragraph, I can use those main ideas and put them just briefly into my conclusion. So the sentence starter would be in summary. Cool. Okay, so that's the second part since I already have this first part. So let me go back to my 4-square chart. And also, I want to be able to use a lot of the paragraphs that I wrote as well. So what I wrote here is, as these examples have proven, when we deal with them sooner than later, we can avoid more unnecessary conflicts. So I like that. I'm going to use that because that's a really cool, almost like transitional sentence, and then a quick summary of all my points. So I'm going to put that into my conclusion. And this is just, the first draft of my conclusion. It doesn't have to be perfect. But I do want it to be good because then later when I revise, it's only going to get better. So what are my examples though? So in summary, I'm going to use that as a sentence starter. Okay, and then I'm going to go back and I can use my 4-square chart, but I can also use my essay, the body paragraphs that I wrote. So my point 1 was, if you deal with the problem right away, it won't get out of control. And those are the examples I used. Then I said, if you don't deal with the problem immediately, it can have negative consequences, President Trump. And then my counter was, people could say that if you ignore it, the problem will solve itself. But then in my counter, I refuted that. And I talked about how, no, that's not the case, especially with COVID. So let me take a look at my body paragraph so I can get ideas from the body paragraph for my conclusion. Okay, so here's my body paragraph. And there's my topic sentence. Here's my evidence in pink. Here's more support evidence. Let me focus down here. If students keep up with their work and do not let it pile up to where it will be difficult to complete, then they will not be stressed during the school year. These students in Schmo learn that it is better to deal with the problem right away than let it get bigger until it's out of control. Okay, so I think what I could do is probably talk a little bit about Schmo, but not too much because I've already talked about it. In summary, Schmo learns that. So I just wrote, in summary, Schmo learns that he should have told Bruno right away that he was not allowed to talk to him, but he did not, and he paid the consequence later. Then I also want to maybe bring up my other point which was how if you don't deal with the problem immediately, it can have negative consequences. How Trump didn't deal with the coronavirus right away. And then that he tried to ignore it because that was my counterclaim and let it solve itself. But then we know that that wasn't true. And I can use my sample counter paragraph as to get points from here. And actually, it looks like my concluding sentences are really, they wrap up my paragraph. So using part of my concluding sentence is probably a good idea to put those into my conclusion. But if Trump had dealt with the pandemic as soon as possible, he would have saved many lives, jobs, and strife. Trump's act of ignoring serious virus and terrible consequences proves that dealing with the problem or pandemic immediately is always the best way to deal with conflict. I can put that in there. I can also just put how, like, you know, because of the counterclaim paragraph, that some people say if you ignore the problem, maybe just a little bit. Because it's a conclusion, I just want to wrap all of my whole essay up. I don't want to put, you know, I don't want to rewrite the whole essay in the conclusion. I just want to put like the main points. So let me go back to my conclusion. Okay, so I'm going to talk about President Trump because that's my other example. President Trump did not deal with the pandemic right away, and later the U.S. would face the consequence of many deaths, lost jobs, lost money, and what's a word for stress? And lots of stress maybe, huh? President Trump did not deal with the pandemic right away, and later the U.S. would face the consequence of many deaths, lost job, lost money, and emotional, let's say emotional stress. Okay, and then I didn't really write what the consequence was. Paid the consequence for Shmuel. Consequence. See, getting beat up. Okay, so I just put, because I want to be specific, right? So I put that in summary, Shmuel learns that he should have told Bruno right away that he was not allowed to talk to him, but he did not, and he paid the consequence later of being beaten by Lieutenant Kotler. My other example, President Trump did not deal with the pandemic right away, and later the U.S. would face the consequences of many deaths, loss of jobs, loss of money, and emotional stress. All right. Now the next part. So here's a summary. And actually, if I want to include a little bit from my counter, I can. You know, some could say that, so again, this is just coming from my counter paragraph. Some could say that you ignore the problem, it will solve itself. And I don't want to rewrite my whole paragraph. Ignoring the problem could solve, could allow. All right, so I even touched a little bit on my counterclaim, so I'm going to put that a different color. So some could say that ignoring the problem could allow the problem to solve itself, but in the case of Shmuel from The Boy in the Striped Pajamas and the coronavirus pandemic, ignoring the problem only made it worse. Okay, and that all reinforces my thesis statement, right? This is wrapping up my body paragraphs, but it's always going back to my claim. Dealing with problems right away is always the best way to solve them so they do not get too big to handle. And even though these are non-examples, right? I use Shmuel, I use President Trump as my examples, but they're both non-examples because they don't deal with the problems right away, but they're still good examples to use because it shows the negative consequences, right? So then now that I've done the first two steps and let me go back to the conclusion guide. So I restated and reinforced my claim. Then I reviewed all my points. So that is all of this right here in the light green is reviewing my body paragraphs, what I said basically. And I kind of like a shortcut or like a conclusion paragraph writing hack. I just looked at the end. I looked at like my concluding sentence. I looked at my topic sentence in my body paragraphs, and that's what gave me the points that I needed to talk about in my conclusion. And it almost like gave me the words too. So just going to my sample counterclaim, using the topic sentence, using my concluding sentence, and even the same for the other body paragraphs, I was able to figure out, okay, it's like a little hack, right? Those are my main ideas, the beginning and the end. And so I took both of those and I kind of turned them into like one sentence or two sentences, and I put them into my conclusion. So that's all of this right here. Okay, so the next thing that I need to do, and let me look at the guide. Where's the guide? Is leave a lasting impression. So ask the reader to take action, answer a question, or another memorable statement. What do I want the readers of my essay to remember after they read my essay? And then there is a sentence starter that you can use if you want to. The next time you face conflict, you should. So if I look, again, going back to my 4-square chart, just coming in clutch, right? So down here, the question was, what should the reader do now? And I said, it is always best to solve problems sooner, and the next time you have a problem, you should solve it immediately. Okay, so I could use that. Let me copy that. It's my own words, so it's not plagiarism. It's not copying off of me. And then let me put it here, see if it works. If not, I might have to use that sentence starter. It is always best to solve problems sooner, and the next time you have a problem, you should solve it immediately. I feel like it's very brief. Let me see this conclusion guide. The next time you face conflict, you should. Okay, so what I could do is I could leave it. It's not terrible. But I'm going for the A. So what I'm probably gonna do is break that up maybe into 2 sentences. So let me work on that. Okay, so I'm gonna use Schmoll and Trump. And then what I did was I just said Schmoll and President Trump prove that it's always best to solve problems sooner, because if they had solved, right, their problems, or maybe even dealt, if they had dealt with, because if they had dealt with, going back to my thesis, right, with their problems immediately, then they would not have caused such negative consequences, and the issues would not have become, and then I wrote too big to handle. And I could always go back to my thesis too. Let me go to the 4-square chart before it becomes a bigger problem. That's the best way to deal with conflict. Back here. Too big to handle. Okay, or I can say like too large, too tremendous, too out of control, right? And then my advice to the reader. The next time you have a problem, you should solve it immediately. I almost want to give them like a warning so that you do not suffer the same fate as Schmoll and the US during the coronavirus pandemic. And I think years later, when maybe future generations or my students that are now in 7th and 6th grade read these essays, right? It's like a warning to them. And they'll remember, oh, I remember that coronavirus pandemic. So that's what makes it such a good example, right? I remember reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. They didn't deal with the problem right away, and then it did get out of control. So that's a pretty good way to end my essay, huh? The next time you have a problem, you should solve it immediately so that you do not suffer the same fate as Schmoll and the US during the coronavirus pandemic. And then, even though I know I try to tell you guys, use formal language, for this last sentence, that's okay. You can use second person. If you don't want to, though, you could say something like, the next time someone, right? So this is how I'm making it, like, not first or second person. Someone has a problem, he or she or they, or just depends. I'm going to do he, she, should solve it immediately so that he or she does not suffer the same fate as Schmoll and the US during the coronavirus pandemic. So that's how you can just easily make something into third person, which is more formal. Okay, so here is my finished conclusion. And what did I use? I used my Foursquare chart to give me the ideas, right? I used my Foursquare chart. I used my main points from the Foursquare chart for body paragraph 1, 2, and 3. But then also what I ended up doing was I ended up using my other paragraphs, my other body paragraphs. So here's the sample counterclaim. I ended up using the parts that were most valuable were the topic sentence and the concluding sentence. So those parts of the essay, of the body paragraphs, were most useful for me to use in my conclusion. So I just kind of paraphrased, right? And then put them back into my conclusion. And I used the conclusion guide, restating the thesis. Then I summarized all my main ideas. And then I left a lasting impression on the reader, asking them to, hey, when next time you have a problem, deal with it right away, because you don't want to end up like the people in my essay, my examples. And now I have a pretty decent conclusion paragraph. That is it. So as always, if you have questions, please message me, text me, email me. Okay, that is all. Stay safe.